Day 5 of High Performance Training 2. Day 5 of High Performance Training 2 will discuss periodization. Periodization is the culmination of many of the topics we've been talking about, starting with volume, intensity, recovery, peaking, and tapering. If you combine all of those training terms together, you get what I like to call periodization, and periodization to me is high performance training. Again, I will reference several other discussions and videos that we've had. You can look at those on therealcircle.com. If you click on HPT, the first video on that page is high performance training, and it discusses many of the topics throughout that we've been talking about today. And also on Coach Shannon Talks, there is another video with me communicating more information on periodization. Of course, all of the communications are a little bit different, and if you want to get more information about this specific topic, you can refer to those videos either before or after this. Either way, the idea is for you to get as much information about these topics as you possibly can so you can begin to train yourself at a high level and continue with your high performance training. Okay, so what do we got and what are we going to talk about? Periodization, and as much as all of the things we just discussed, I'm going to kind of take a leap of faith because some of the information, again, is already talked about on those other communications. However, I'll give you a basic definition and then we'll kind of advance it from there. Periodization essentially is breaking down the annual plan into specific periods with the design and intent of manipulating the volume and the intensity so that athletes can peak for competitions. Okay, that's my definition of periodization. Where does it come from? Actually, periodization's been around, for centuries, and not many people may even be aware of it, although lately in the last 10 or 15, 20 years, strength and conditioning has become a big component in terms of coaching, where nowadays you have strength and conditioning coaches, and that's what they do as a full-time job. The Eastern Europeans, formerly the Soviet bloc Russians, and the East Germans really started to develop periodization in the 50s and the 60s, and you can hear more about that information on those other two discussions that I've had. Okay, so we'll start with the 3 or 4 basic concepts, and then we'll go from there. The annual plan, which is the plan for the year. Some people call that the micro cycle. And the macro cycle, which is the bigger picture. The macro cycle can also be a 4-year quad. The Mezzo Cycle is next, and that's one step down from the macro cycle, meaning the bigger picture into a smaller picture. That can be 1 training month or several training months. The micro cycle is typically 1 training week, and depending on your plan, a training week can be 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, 7 days, 8 days, 9 days. I'm pointing that out because the flexibility of your plan will determine how long the week is, and or the microcycle, and or the macro cycle. Finally, the training session is the smallest piece of the annual plan, meaning the annual plan is the big picture, which is the macro cycle. The mesocycle is this next smaller picture. The microcycle is even a smaller picture than that, and the training session is even a smaller picture than that. All of those need to fit together, and they are summated, and I point that out because that's how your training should be. That's how your goals should be. That's how just about everything in this world actually is built. You have to have a game plan, meaning some type of document or some type of blueprint or something to work off of, and a lot of people call those goals. And then you kind of, have a really big picture, and then you kind of work backwards from there. And that's essentially what periodization is. To make a long story short, periodization is really a plan, right? It's really a long-term plan in order for athletes to reach their goals. So I'm going to kind of shift the focus just a little bit and talk more about planning with periodization. And yesterday on day 4, I described peaking and tapering and was suggesting that there may be, a lot of competitions that high school and or collegiate athletes have, and that may be difficult for them to have peaking and tapering for every single competition and or event, and I still believe that. However, typically in the summer months, spring months in the summer, now the athletes are a little more, it's easier for them to do a training design as I'm describing here, where they could likely do one or two competitions per month and have a peak towards, if they're a college athlete, let's say the University Nationals or the University World Team Trials, or the World Championships, if their skill levels high enough where they can actually go to the World Team Trials. If they're a high school athlete or a junior level athlete, basically the same type of thing, but it would be one level down, where they could do 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 competitions prior to their state tournament, which freestyle and Greco-Roman state tournament, which would be the national qualifier prior to going to junior nationals. Or they could use that same concept with the junior world team trials. Okay, so what's the point? The point is you're planning so that you can peak. You're planning, a larger picture all the way down to a smaller picture. Along the way, you're manipulating the volume and the intensity so that you're not doing the same amount of volume the whole entire spring or summer or Mezzo Cycle. Again, Mezzo Cycle is either a training month and or several training months. In the example of volume and intensity, if you go back and listen to those again, there's building weeks, and depending on your Mezzo Cycle, if it's 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks or 6 weeks, each week will build into the next. Ultimately, at the end of that training cycle, there's a recovery week, and the recovery week, again, is designed to reduce the fatigue. If you go back and listen to the peaking and tapering tape, if we're tapering for, let's say, the World Team Trials in a periodization plan, a high-performance training plan, maybe that taper happens over weeks. Maybe it's 2 Mezzo Cycles. Maybe it's 1 Mezzo Cycle. It will depend on what type of program that you're in and or how you are designing the peaking and tapering plan. Now, if you've got 1 competition per month, it's very easy to do. If you've got six competitions per month, meaning, like most high school programs, a lot of high school programs have something on a Wednesday, and then they may have something on a Friday and a Saturday, and they may do that twice a month. Right there, that's 6 competitions. That's very difficult to do. However, in the spring and in the summer, high school athletes and collegiate athletes typically have competitions once a month, and I suggest it's a lot easier to plan those type of events. Okay, switching gears just a little bit, with regard to a periodization plan, we're going to talk about now how anyone would be able to identify if a plan is summated, meaning one thing is added to the next, to the next, to the next, and ultimately to get you to peak towards set event. Maybe it's World Team Trials, maybe it's the Nationals, maybe it's a state tournament, or the Olympic Trials, or the World Championships, or whatever. Doesn't matter the tournament. The idea is so that you can understand and you're able to identify if the plan is going to overtrain you, undertrain you, or train you, in high performance training. If you are able to, and I suggest you can do this, on one of the other talks that we had, we talked about a training log and monitoring your own training. And this is going to come into effect here with the periodization plan. You, the athlete, need to do this. You should, or you could, monitor how much training you're doing per week. And how do you do that? You could pay attention to how many minutes of live wrestling you're doing per week, and or you could communicate with your coach and say, hey coach, I'm trying to figure out how much time we're wrestling per week, so I can start to monitor that, and I can start to keep track of how my body is feeling. And that probably will, the coach may or may not, respond. If he doesn't respond or she doesn't respond, you can just pay attention and practice. Write down how many live minutes a week you're wrestling, and do that over the course of a 21-day period, which typically is 3 weeks and or could be, like a training month. And you can ask your coach, how many training sessions are we going to have in this Mezzo Cycle? And the Mezzo Cycle, again, is a training month. How many training sessions are we going to have in this micro cycle? And again, in the training, that's a training week. How many live minutes are we going to have? And you can go ask those type of questions so you can start to put together your own periodization plan. You can start to add up the minutes. You can start to create your own microcycle. Again, you want to have at least 2 building weeks with regard to the training and live minutes, and then you want to have at least 1 recovery week. So if maybe you're on a 3 or 4 week plan where you have 3 building weeks and 1 recovery week, so that's typically like a month, right? That's like an actual month of a calendar year. Maybe it's a 5 week plan. Maybe it's a 6 weeks plan. However, whatever it is, I wouldn't say 6 weeks, because that's almost 2 months of actually building, and your body actually like is going to break down. A lot of programs and systems use 2 and 3 building weeks with the 3rd week as a recovery or the 4th week as a recovery, because that's typically how much the body can handle in a periodization plan. However, getting back to the point, you start to track and monitor your live wrestling in minutes, and you start to do the same thing with your strength and conditioning. And by the way, if you're not doing a strength and conditioning program, that should be added into your full program, along with psychological skills training. Those 3 components, along with nutrition training, I believe, are what most athletes need to perform at a high level. And again, you're going to be tracking and monitoring those. So I guess I kind of just said that briefly, and I'm going to expound on it just a little bit. A high performance training plan should entail these 3 or 4 components. A periodization plan with your training, and the training is going to be the sport-specific training, the strength and conditioning in the weight room, psychological skills training, and nutritional training. And nutritional training essentially means you're paying attention to what it's going in and out of your body, so you're not cutting a tremendous amount of weight. And all of those things are going to be tied in with you tracking and monitoring and making certain that your program, your system is undulating. And again, undulating means a wavy type of pattern. I'll give it to you in numbers so you can understand what I'm saying. And this could be used with your psychological skills training, your strength conditioning in the weight room, and or your high performance training in sport-specific wrestling room. So the volume of training is what I'm going to describe, and you can use all of these at all of those parameters, or all of those different topics that I suggested: strength and conditioning, wrestling, and nutrition, psychological skills training. If we start with volume of 7, and we build to 8, and we build to 9, in the recovery week, you would likely go back to 7 or 7.5. I'm using just numbers so that you can see it's the volume of training. It's not necessarily wrestling in minutes, but that's how each of your Mezzo cycles should be. As a microcycle, the microcycle is each training week. Each training week, you would also start to count how many practices you have. Typically, you're going to have the same amount of practices each week, right? And then you count how many minutes of training that you have. And that's, I guess, the bigger picture. The bigger picture is the volume of training that you have. And again, you're going to be tracking this, and then it's going to follow that same pattern where it should be building, and then there should be a reduction of the amount of training that you're doing. In that way, you'd be able to ascertain how much training you're doing per week, and then per month, and then ultimately per year. In a peaking tapering type of system, and you would want to do this probably 2 to 3 times a year, maybe for the national tournament, and maybe for the world team trials, and maybe for either continental championships, Pan Am Games, Pan American Games, or Pan American Championships, or the World Championships, Junior World Championships, University World Championships, along those lines. So you're peaking, tapering 3 or 4 times a year. You may actually peak or taper for 2 to 3 weeks, where the reduction of volume actually goes down. Again, collegiate athletes and high school athletes likely would be able to do this in the spring. International athletes can do this any time of the year. Over a 2 or 3 week span, now your volume would actually reverse. So maybe you've gotten to level 9 or 10. Now it would be, then the Mezzo cycle would be 10, 9, 7 in terms of the amount and the volume that you're doing in a high performance training plan that is periodized. And again, periodized means you're breaking the training up into specific blocks to get a certain purpose, or to get a certain peak, or to get a certain response from the training. Now, earlier I suggested that all of the training, and I'm talking about psychological skills training and nutritional training and strength and conditioning, can be the same way. In other words, their volume should actually shift too. In other words, let's say you're in the weight room. Again, I'll use those same numbers. Your weight room numbers should actually increase and decrease as well. They should actually undulate. That's a better way, I guess, to describe undulate, increasing and decreasing. So there's a variety of training. 1 week you're doing, and then this should coincide or almost be at the same volume that you're doing with your strength and conditioning and your wrestling. so that you're not being overtrained. If one is heavier than the other, a lot of times you can be overtrained anyway. In the weight room, you're going 7, 8, 9, and you're going back to 7 in terms of the pounds that you're actually lifting or the repetitions that you're actually lifting. And then the next week it could be 8, 9, 10, going back to 8 or 8.5. Can you see what I'm saying there? All of your training should be periodized, especially if you're looking for high performance training. Now, nutritional training should be the same way. Depending on how much volume you're training that week, that would actually dictate how many nutrients you're putting into your body. In other words, if you have a heavy volume week, and you can calculate that, again, by adding up the minutes of training time, you, over the course of 2 or 3 months, you'll start to really understand this is a heavy week based on the numbers that we've done before. That is going to require more energy for your body. On a lighter volume week, you're going to require less energy, which means less nutrients, which means less food. And you can, again, calculate that by your training minutes in volume and over the course of a week and a month. Psychological skills training is the same way, where some weeks you will be heavier in terms of the volume that you're actually putting in and lighter based on periodizing the training plan. Now, the purpose and the explanation behind doing all of that is so that you're constantly adding in variety to your training, where you're not doing the same thing volume-wise each week. What happens if you do the same volume all the time? You're either going to be undertrained, where you're not training enough, or you're going to be overtrained, where you're going to be fatigued and tired. The idea behind manipulating and undulating those volumes is your body actually gets a break and your mind actually gets a break, and you are periodizing your training plan so that you can get what you need in terms of high performance training. I guess I haven't mentioned this much at all, but I think I did on one of these audio notes. If you would like more information specifically about many of these topics, you can shoot me an email at coachshannyn.com, and I can go a little more into depth and help you create a training plan that will sufficiently get you to where you would like to go. We have 2 more days to discuss what I like to call high performance training, and to give you a little more insight and maybe motivate you to kind of listen to these next 2 and review some of the other ones. The next day 6 will be fun, and I think that has to be an integral part of your training plan, and communication. Those will be the last 2 training sessions in high performance training 2.